France, summer 1944. The fog hung low over the hedgerows as dawn rolled across Normandy. From the east came a sound no German had ever heard before. Not one engine, not 10, but hundreds, deep and rhythmic, echoing like the heartbeat of a machine too big to comprehend. A German panzer division waited along a ridge near Saint-Lô. The officers peered through binoculars, expecting another scattered Allied thrust. What they saw instead froze them. From beyond the mist, the horizon moved. A wave of armor, olive drab, endless, shimmering under the rising sun. Rows upon rows of Sherman tanks, half-tracks, supply trucks, bulldozers, and fuel carriers. It wasn't a column, it was a continent in motion. One captain whispered, "How many can they have left?" His general didn't answer. The low thunder of engines drowned out every word. The sound was wrong, not desperate like the last days of Kursk, not strained like a retreat. It was steady, mechanical, confident. Each track rotation measured, each engine synchronized. To the German ear, it sounded less like war and more like manufacturing. The general lowered his binoculars and spoke quietly. "It's not an army," he said. "It's a factory on wheels." Behind him, artillery opened fire. Shells burst among the Allied columns, but the line didn't slow. For every tank hit, two more rolled forward. The Germans had always prided themselves on quality. Thicker armor, longer guns, sharper tactics. But that morning, as the endless tide of Shermans advanced, they realized they were facing something new. A nation that fought with numbers, not divisions. With engines, not emblems. Somewhere deep within the chaos, a Sherman driver radioed to his platoon. "Keep moving. We've got 1,000 behind us." He wasn't exaggerating. That was the moment the myth of German superiority began to collapse, not under artillery but under arithmetic. The Battle of Normandy was no longer a clash of armies. It was the day the factories joined the fight. Before the war began, German generals believed they had already seen America's limits. To them, the United States was a land of consumers, not conquerors. Its soldiers were factory hands, its generals businessmen, and its industry too soft, too comfortable to fight a mechanized war. They weren't entirely wrong. In 1939, America had fewer than 500 combat-ready tanks. Its army ranked 17th in the world, smaller than Portugal's. The German blitzkrieg, when it struck Poland and France, looked like science fiction. Radio-coordinated armor, precision strikes, mechanized encirclement. No one on Earth could match it. In Berlin, generals like Heinz Guderian and Erwin Rommel watched film reels of Detroit assembly lines and laughed. Quantity without quality, they said. To them, mass production was a weakness, not a weapon. They believed that victory belonged to craftsmen, to the perfect tank, the perfect gun, the perfect soldier. They built the Tiger and the Panther, armored beasts of elegance and terror, each one handmade, each one expensive, each one irreplaceable. But war does not reward perfection. It rewards speed. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, the German High Command expected a slow mobilization, years of ramp-up, limited output, and small, fragile units. They misread what American industry really was, because the factories that built refrigerators, tractors, and cars didn't need to learn mechanization. They were mechanization. Within a single year, those same assembly lines that once made Buicks and Fords began spitting out Sherman tanks, aircraft engines, and artillery shells faster than Germany could destroy them. By the time Guderian received his first field report from Normandy in 1944, the German assumption had already died. The officer who filed it wrote, "We destroy dozens of their tanks each day, but the next morning the fields are full again. It seems they build them overnight." That wasn't far from the truth. In war, arrogance is a weapon that dulls quickly. The Germans had built the best tanks in the world, but they were fighting a nation that had built the best system. And systems don't retreat, they multiply. The myth of American industrial weakness ended not on a battlefield, but in a factory with no closing shift. In 1939, Detroit was building dreams, not tanks. The great American factories were still monuments to civilian life. Chevrolets, Fords, Packards, Buicks. Chrome and comfort, not armor and fire. But within 4 years, those same assembly lines would become the beating heart of the most powerful war machine in history. It began with an idea: the arsenal of democracy. When President Franklin Roosevelt used the phrase in December 1940, few Americans understood how literal it would become. What he meant was simple. America wouldn't just send men to fight. It would send machines, so many that tyranny would drown under the weight of production. The U.S. State Army Ordnance Department called in Detroit's industrial giants, Ford, Chrysler, General Motors. Engineers who once argued over car designs now sat at tables covered in blueprints for tanks. They weren't military men, but they understood one thing better than anyone on Earth: how to make things fast. In early 1941, Chrysler began construction on the Detroit Tank Arsenal, a facility so massive it stretched over 1 million square feet. The architects built it in 163 days, during a blizzard. The first M3 tank rolled off the line before the concrete was even dry. Ford's Willow Run plant followed soon after, the largest factory in the world, dedicated entirely to the B-24 Liberator bomber. It would eventually produce 1 aircraft every 63 minutes. The auto barons transformed their empires overnight. Presses designed for fenders now shaped armor plates. Engine plants retooled for tank transmissions. Assembly lines learned to weld instead of rivet. By 1942, the United States was producing more tanks in a month than Germany in a year. The secret wasn't just size. It was standardization. Every Sherman tank shared identical parts. Bolts, engines, and tracks could be swapped in any field depot across the world. A destroyed hull could be stripped, rebuilt, and returned to combat within days. The Germans, meanwhile, were trapped in complexity. Dozens of variants, each requiring different tools, fittings, and fuel. A single line from a U.S. production memo captured the shift perfectly. We do not build masterpieces, we build replacements. It was the quiet revolution, a system where no single tank mattered, only the total. When Detroit converted to wartime production, the U.S. didn't just build an army. It built a philosophy that in modern war, efficiency was strategy. And while the German High Command celebrated craftsmanship, America celebrated quantity and prepared to bury its enemies under it. War has a way of turning statistics into weapons. And by 1944, American arithmetic had become lethal. The numbers were staggering. Between 1940 and 1945, the United States produced over 49,000 Sherman tanks, 10,000 light tanks, and over 250,000 armored vehicles of every kind. In the same period, Germany managed roughly 19,000 tanks total, including all models from Panzer I to Tiger II. The math spoke its own language. For every German tank built, America built 3. For every Panther lost, a replacement took months. For every Sherman lost, a replacement took days. A Panther cost $117,000 to make and took half a year to assemble. A Sherman cost $33,000 and rolled off the line in 10 days. Even more devastating was the rhythm. At the height of production, Chrysler's Detroit arsenal built 1 tank every 45 minutes. Ford's plants produced trucks faster than bullets could be counted. The logistics web stretched across the continent. Steel from Pennsylvania, engines from Michigan, rubber from Louisiana, copper from Montana. Each part moved by rail in a synchronized dance that no enemy could bomb or blockade fast enough. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe couldn't protect its own factories. Allied bombers tore through Germany's industrial heart. The Panther and Tiger, masterpieces of engineering, became victims of their own perfection. Too complex to mass produce, too fragile to maintain, too late to matter. German intelligence dismissed early reports of America's production rates as propaganda. One memo from 1943 read, The enemy's claim of 2,000 tanks monthly is mechanically impossible. 3 months later, Detroit proved them wrong and doubled it. A Wehrmacht officer at Normandy described the shock. "We destroyed dozens of their tanks, and the next day the same fields are full again. It is as if the earth gives birth to them overnight." It wasn't the earth, it was the assembly line. And beyond tanks came everything else: 300,000 aircraft, 2.5 million trucks, 41 billion rounds of ammunition. The scale crushed comprehension. When historians later tried to quantify American power, they realized something simple but terrifying. The factories were producing faster than the front could consume. The U.S. Army didn't just have reserves, it had surplus. The war of skill and precision Germany had planned was already gone. In its place stood a new kind of conflict, one fought not by aces and armor, but by schedules, shifts, and steel tonnage. It was the moment industry itself became the deadliest weapon on earth. North Africa, February 1943. The American Army met the Wehrmacht for the first time and bled. At Kasserine Pass, German panzers under Rommel sliced through inexperienced U.S. lines. Sherman tanks burned under the desert sun, their thin armor and short 75mm guns no match for the German 88s. The defeat was humiliating. To the Germans, it was proof of what they had always believed, that American machines were toys built by amateurs. A German officer wrote in his diary, "They fight like businessmen, slow to learn, quick to rebuild." He was half right. In the months that followed, the businessmen went back to work, not in battlefields, but in factories. The U.S. Army Ordnance Department tore apart every destroyed Sherman, studied the failures, and began redesigning the logistics chain itself. They didn't try to build a perfect tank. They built a perfect system. By late 1943, replacements for the Kasserine losses had already arrived. Improved Shermans with thicker armor, better transmissions, and the new 76mm gun. Crews were retrained to fight as coordinated units with air support, artillery, and supply integration. And behind every tank stood an invisible army. Tens of thousands of factory workers who never saw the front but fought through speed. When the invasion of Normandy began in June 1944, the world saw what industrial warfare truly meant. At dawn, as Allied divisions stormed the beaches, the first waves of armor began landing. Over 1,500 Shermans within the first 48 hours. By the end of the month, nearly 10,000 tanks had crossed the Channel. German commanders thought it was impossible. No nation could replace losses that fast. Yet every day more arrived. Fresh crews, full tanks, unbroken morale. Outside St. Lo, a German Panzer Lehr officer reported, "We destroyed 40 of their tanks yesterday. This morning, 60 more are advancing." The logic of war had reversed. The Germans still won duels. Their Tigers and Panthers killed Shermans one by one. But each duel changed nothing. The math always caught up. For every Tiger that survived, the Allies sent 5 more Shermans. For every German victory on the map, American supply ships erased it overnight. Tactics broke even. Production broke the front. By autumn 1944, Germany could no longer keep up. Factories were bombed, fuel was scarce, spare parts non-existent. A damaged Tiger was abandoned because it couldn't be repaired. A damaged Sherman was repaired, refueled, and back in battle by morning. On paper, the Germans still had superior tanks. In reality, they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and outlasted. The Battle of Kasserine had begun as a lesson in humility. Normandy became the exam America passed with steel. As one U.S. mechanic wrote in his field log that summer, "The Germans fight with precision. We fight with replacement parts." And in the long run, parts always outlive precision. By late 1944, the war's numbers had broken free of logic. The United States wasn't just fighting faster. It was producing faster than it could fight. Every 24 hours, American industry built 28 new tanks, 63 aircraft, and 3,000 trucks. Convoys streamed across the Atlantic like arteries carrying steel and fuel. In the logistics reports, a new kind of phrase appeared: supply exceeding consumption. It had never happened in military history. The front couldn't even absorb the flow. At ports in Cherbourg and Antwerp, armor waited in rows 5 miles long, engines sealed, crews rotating through in shifts. The U.S. Army had built so much that its greatest problem became storage. Meanwhile, the Germans were unraveling. Each month they lost 600 tanks and could replace only 100. Half of their remaining factories worked without power, and their rail network lay shattered under Allied bombs. When Guderian toured the Ruhr industrial zone, he reportedly said, "We are running on fumes and faith." But faith couldn't refill fuel lines. By winter, the ratio of armor in Western Europe had reached 10-1 in the Allies' favor. Even when German gunners destroyed a column, fresh tanks arrived by the next morning. The battlefront began to resemble a conveyor belt: destruction on one end, delivery on the other. One Wehrmacht intelligence memo read, "Enemy replacements arrive faster than ours are destroyed. The mathematics of this war have become meaningless." They were wrong. The mathematics had simply changed masters. Every American tank that reached Europe represented not just steel, but time, the raw seconds of labor, production, and coordination that Germany could no longer match. When supply chains become faster than destruction, war stops being a contest of courage. It becomes a countdown. And by 1945, Germany's clock had run out. Detroit, 1943. The city no longer slept. Its skyline glowed orange from 1,000 furnaces, its streets alive with the hum of endless production. This was no longer the capital of automobiles. It had become the arsenal of democracy. At the heart of it stood the Detroit Tank Arsenal, a building so massive it had its own weather, warm inside even in the Michigan winter, cold outside where the snow turned black from smoke. 22,000 workers rotated through 3 shifts, 7 days a week. The lines never stopped. Inside, the rhythm was mechanical poetry. Steel plates clanged into place. Cranes swung turrets onto hulls. Sparks rained from welders' torches like orange snow. Women in overalls hammered rivets next to men who used to build Buicks. Above the noise, the foreman shouted, 45 minutes! 1 tank! And he wasn't exaggerating. By mid-1943, Chrysler's arsenal produced 1 complete Sherman tank every 45 minutes. When a shift ended, another began without pause. Even maintenance crews worked between production runs. On the wall above the main floor hung a simple sign: "Don't wish it done, weld it." Henry Ford himself visited once and stood speechless at the sight. A former car factory was now churning out enough armor to equip an entire army every month. Tanks rolled directly off the assembly line into rail cars waiting outside. Within 72 hours, those tanks were bound for ports on the East Coast, their destinations marked only by stenciled letters: UK, Africa, Europe. Foreign observers couldn't believe it. British liaison officers sent dispatches describing the arsenal as a city that builds war by the hour. German intelligence analysts intercepted these reports and dismissed them as Allied exaggeration. "No country can produce tanks like automobiles," one report scoffed, but Detroit did. Even the smallest details were optimized. A single tank required 1.8 miles of wiring, 15,000 bolts, and 5,000 man-hours. To the workers on the line, those weren't numbers. They were lifelines. They wrote messages inside the armor plates. "Good luck, boys." From Detroit, with fire. Each tank that left the factory carried not just steel and fuel, but a promise that America's power was now measured in minutes, not miles. Across the ocean, German commanders could feel the pressure without seeing it. They called it the Endless Machine. In Detroit, it had a simpler name: the Day Shift. And for the first time in history, a single city was building more tanks in a month than an empire could in a year. Germany, late 1944. The Reich was crumbling, but its generals still clung to illusions of precision. That one perfect counterattack, one breakthrough, one new tank design could turn the tide. In Berlin, General Heinz Guderian, the father of Blitzkrieg, sat hunched over field reports that made no sense anymore. Pages filled with numbers, lists of lost equipment, pleas for replacements. His pen tapped the edge of the desk as he read. Panzer Regiment 503. Operational tanks, 12. Fuel for 2 days. Ammunition at 40%. Enemy has replaced destroyed armor overnight. He looked up at his adjutant. How many did we destroy last week? Over 200 Shermans, Herr General. And how many do they have now? The adjutant hesitated. More. That word hung heavier than any bomb. Guderian closed his eyes. For years he had believed in quality, the superiority of German steel, the genius of German engineering. The Tiger and Panther were his children, built to dominate. But they were also delicate, expensive, and few. Each one took months to build, weeks to repair, and hours to lose. By contrast, the enemy fought with machines that seemed to multiply faster than they could burn. The reports from the front were filled with disbelief. Enemy tanks arrive in columns too long to count. We have begun calling them the Steel Rivers. He knew then what had gone wrong. Blitzkrieg had been designed for short wars, quick strikes, fast victories. It was never meant for a war of attrition. Germany had gambled that the United States could not mobilize in time. They had gambled wrong. Speer, the armaments minister, warned him months earlier. We cannot outbuild them. Our hope lies in miracles, jet aircraft, wonder weapons. Guderian's answer had been pride. We will outfight them. But by the autumn of 1944, no amount of fighting could balance the math. American factories were producing more tanks in a month than Germany had left on the front. When Allied forces crossed the Rhine, German resistance was heroic and hopeless. Guderian watched photographs of the crossing, seeing thousands of Sherman tanks rolling across pontoon bridges like an endless conveyor belt. He whispered, "They are not soldiers anymore. They are production numbers." That was his moment of realization. The death of strategy, the triumph of industry. The Reich's tanks were superior, but they were surrounded, not by men, but by manufacturing. And when the factories of Detroit and Pittsburgh roared, even the greatest tactician of the mechanized age had to admit defeat. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the battlefields of Europe were littered not only with wreckage, but with lessons. And none was clearer than this. Strategy ends where production begins. Germany had entered the war with the best trained soldiers, the finest tanks, and the most experienced generals. America had entered with none of those things, but with something deadlier, capacity. By the end, the numbers spoke their verdict. The United States built more war material than all the Axis powers combined. Over 297,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, 2.4 million trucks, and 40 billion bullets. The factories didn't just support the front, they were the front. German generals had mocked Detroit's efficiency as soulless, mechanical, uninspired. But that mechanization became the soul of victory. Every hour, a new weapon was born. Every minute, a new shipment left a port. The math became unstoppable, a tide made of steel and willpower. In the ruins of Berlin, Allied intelligence teams studied captured German documents. One phrase appeared repeatedly in the reports from 1944. The enemy's material power is beyond imagination. It wasn't imagination. It was industry made into doctrine. For the Americans, logistics wasn't background work. It was warfare itself. Engineers, dockhands, and welders became as decisive as tank crews. The battlefield had expanded from the hedgerows of France to the factory floors of Michigan. The old rules of war, bravery, maneuver, genius, still mattered, but only within the framework of supply. As one U.S. general put it bluntly, amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. And when the German generals looked back, they realized their error. They had fought the last war, while America was already fighting the next, one where the winner was not the better fighter, but the faster builder. The Tiger tank may have symbolized German might, but it was the endless hum of Sherman engines that carried the future. The day industry became strategy, victory became inevitable. When the smoke cleared, the ruins of Europe were filled with two kinds of silence, one of defeat and one of machinery finally resting. The last Sherman tanks sat idle on cobblestone streets, their engines cooling, their crews staring at a world rebuilt by production. Germany had entered the war believing perfection could triumph. America ended it, proving that momentum could. The factories of Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Chicago had done what no army in history had ever done. They had manufactured victory. Each rivet, each bolt, each shift on the night line became part of a global offensive, measured not in maps, but in output. As one mechanic in Detroit said when peace was announced, "We didn't just build tanks, we built time, and they ran out of it."